Hey everybody, and welcome to scenario number 30 in our playthrough series. This is Gentle Glen. We've got to have 1,200 guests in our park by the end of October year 3 with a park rating of at least 600. So this one is quite a lot smaller than the ones we've been dealing with here previously, like Future World, for example. We don't have a lot of rides to start with, but the key thing here is that the guests that are in this scenario prefer gentler rides. Hence the name. So that means that we've got to make sure that we go a little less intense on our coasters and things like that, and also choose kind of the right rides to fit. So we're going to start out here on top of the hill with this little Ferris wheel and kind of build that into the landscape. I want to try and kind of respect the landscape here a little bit. We are going to do a fair bit of rework, but I want to try and keep the park fairly harmonious with the landscape. I've always really liked the way that this one starts. Just the junior coaster there with the helicopters and everything. It's just a really good fit, and it looks really nice and it's very pleasant. So I want to generally keep that same kind of vibe. So thankfully, this one is not too difficult here for us to fully build out, so we can do this in we did it in one stream, and it won't take too long to work out there. So I did this little like switchback queue up to our scrambler here, which is up on top of the hillside as well. We've actually got a fair bit of fairly suitable land to work with here, especially like in and around this helicopter ride and the junior coaster. And then there's also a fair bit of space around the outside of the map as well, kind of towards the water, so we can do a bit of work there as well. We don't start with any food and beverage, I don't think, so we're going to go ahead and actually, no, never mind, there's a ice cream stand there, but we're going to go ahead and add in some soda and some other things along here, and now try to expand here a little bit further. So what I'm doing is a little bit of kind of rework here. So the main path is pretty much just kind of an up and back, and then there's that loop that goes up and over. I guess it's not a loop yet, it will be, that goes up to where the Ferris wheel is. So what I want to do is kind of start to expand this out a little bit so we have a place for guests to go. One of the other things that I want to do here is to change this coaster to run block breaks so that we can run 2 trains instead of the shorter trains that run kind of continuously, less realistic. The trouble here that I didn't really kind of consider initially was that the ride with longer trains ends up being a little more intense because it's faster and it's heavier, so the forces are a little bit higher on those corners, and it actually ends up being a little more challenging to get guests to ride it because it now qualifies as a little bit too intense for them. So that's a bit of an oops, but at least we can make some adjustments later. We'll shorten up the trains and find a good middle ground, but thankfully by that point we really don't need the patronage, I guess, of that ride in order for us to make a lot of cash. So I think we'll be fine with it. In general, it was just a bit of something I wasn't thinking about initially. So we'll place our haunted house over here, kind of debated for a minute there where we were going to place it exactly out here on the edge of the water, and we'll reclaim a little bit of that land to build what we typically do for the haunted houses. So I'll raise up that land there, and then I'll go through and add our rocks and our other bits and pieces, kind of sitting it a little bit of away from everything else, sort of on a point here, and just kind of give it that typical haunted house vibe. Also going to add in a little bit of space here that's level with the water that we're going to color in the sand texture, so we're going to give it a little bit of a beach, and we'll kind of carry that through the whole thing all the way around in a few different bits and pieces there. I also wanted to bring in this whole hedge with the conifers there. I think that looks kind of, I don't know, a little bit darker than the brighter green hedge, so it kind of feels more haunted house appropriate, I suppose. So next up is our first tracked ride, and rather than do a coaster, I figured a Flume would be a good option here, mostly because I didn't have a good coaster that I really wanted to work with at the moment, and also just because Flumes are super popular. They typically end up being fairly low in terms of the intensity scale, so the guests here are going to very much ride this, and you can usually charge a fair amount of it too. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a fairly, I don't know, kind of medium-sized layout, I guess, here with a lift and drop in parallel. We've got our drop over top of the lake, so I guess that's where we would draw our water from for the ride. And then we have a sort of level meandering section there, taking advantage of the terrain and get that all situated to how we want it to be. So now I got to get the pathway over to this, and we're going to sort of do this kind of quick and dirty way here, just going up and over the whole thing, and we'll go through and change that eventually. That'll be next episode, but I didn't really love how it looked right there. I don't love pathways that are way high up off of the ground, so this one qualifies for that. It's just got a lot of supports and things that I don't quite like, so we'll go ahead and fix that, but in a different video here. So we're going to go ahead and continue here as we start to hire some staff, and also I wanted to place a spiral slide right here on this little peninsula, kind of as a lighthouse, I suppose. I feel like it's a fairly common theme for the spiral slide, since it vaguely resembles a lighthouse, I guess. But that's what we'll go ahead and continue with here. And we can connect this up as well. Once again, our pathway layout is a little bit wonky here as well, but that's fine, we can adjust it. The pathway is also very bright. This is sort of the first time that we've seen this sort of tan and brown path be the primary path in a starting scenario. So one of the things to consider here is how we can make sure that this doesn't get too busy, and a little bit later on in the next episode we're going to clear this up a little bit and change up our path type a little bit while retaining some of the original charm in some of the original locations. So next up, I wanted to do a Virginia Reel. Not necessarily that I wanted to do one of these rides, but it was what we had available, and they work fairly well in this kind of a scenario. So we're going to make a fairly short layout for this one. It's going to be kind of a mini one, which is good because it's cheap, and we still need to make some cash. And for two, it can very easily set it up inside a hill like this, so just right along the side there. Maybe a little bit more landscape modification than I had initially hoped, but that's okay. We'll make it work, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of duck underneath here for that final run. So basically what I'm doing is just a slalom down, and then a big sort of oval of track underneath, and then it kind of pops up. That whole oval section underneath is going to be through this little tunnel, a little bit extra in terms of tunnel than we might like to have in there, but at the same time, it fits and it works okay, and it also just gives us a little bit of length. I don't know what the stat requirements for this ride are, to be honest. I don't know what the stat requirements for pretty much any ride are, nor do I really care, but this one's going to work just fine. We'll go ahead and plonk in our exit and our entrance there, and then we can connect the whole thing, so use underneath the space there with the junior coaster, but also making sure that we don't place it in a way that gets rid of supports on the junior coaster, so we still have the visual there as well. Now we'll go ahead and place our queue there, and then we're also going to drop in our exit path right here as well. Again, a little bit weird in terms of pathway over here. We got some parallel stuff going on. It just doesn't look great, but in due time we will solve all of those issues. So now we've got our second coaster up, which is good, and now we should start bringing in a little bit more money because we can charge for this, we can charge for the Flume, we've got our initial rides as well, and now we're starting to also get some better research done on some other things, but we've got the time for this one. It's not a terribly hard goal, which is good, so we can actually spend some time beautifying the area while we go, rather than having to wait until the end to really clean up a lot of it. There will still be some of that, but in this instance we do have the time to fix things up just a bit, perhaps. So that's what I'm doing here, kind of going through and making this sort of almost hedge maze worth of kind of back and forth for this ride. Briefly toyed with a couple of other coasters for now, but we're going to wait for a minute here while we clean this up a little further before we get into the next thing. But what we need to do is build up onto the hillside here a little bit. The challenge becomes, if we make something that's too sprawling, then we get into a situation where we can't really fit all of the other stuff in there. So really our rides have to be kind of sort of compact in order to fit just right, and that's fine. I don't mind doing that. It's just something to think about at the very beginning when you look at how much land area you've got versus how much of a goal you have to finish, and just make sure that it actually matches up with your intentions for the whole thing. So one of the next things I'm going to do here is reroute the Helicycles ride that came with the park. You can modify these original rides, which is fine. I want to move that because I want to use that space in the middle here a little bit later, but for now we're going to build a swinging ship, kind of same vein as the haunted house here, where we're going to build it kind of partway over top of the water. I'm actually modifying this helicopter ride once again right after I finished doing it the first time, but this way it fits with our swinging ship. Build our queue in there, kind of on I guess a little bit of a pier, look out over top of the water. That's kind of a nice look there. Connect the whole thing up and then try and connect it across to our entrance there. One of the challenges we have, or at least for me anyway, is the entrance to this park goes right into a tunnel before it pops out again. I don't really like that. I like to have sort of an entry plaza of sorts, so eventually we're going to excavate that out and create ourselves a little bit of space there, but for now we don't really want to spend time on kind of unnecessarily expensive infrastructure projects. So in this instance, it's going to be more of something to do once we get a little bit more cash in hand. Doing a little bit more of a modification to the pathways as well, just so that we can fit things in here a little bit better, including another modification to the helicopter ride so that I bring it up so we don't have to go quite as deep to cross underneath of it there at the haunted house. And now I can go through and do our typical theming on a swinging ship here, where we're going to bring in some rock. We'll raise up the land so we don't have any of the kind of wooden looking stilts underneath of the ride, which I just think never look good. So we'll go through here, continue using that same conifer hedge, kind of carry that across from the haunted house on that other side, and then we'll bring in some of the rock too, and then a couple of these bushes and things. I'm also using kind of those little lighter green with the flowers on them bushes. Typically I just go with the sort of darker green because I think it just looks good and sort of looks a little more scrubby, I suppose, so it feels like more of a typical kind of underbrush type bush. But in this instance I want a little bit more cleanliness perhaps, and so those brighter green bushes I think will work fairly well. We'll stick ourselves a boat hire over there. Those are pretty easy, no-brainer things. Don't make a ton of money, but at the same time it's fine, it fits okay. So now what I want to do is get ourselves a Schwarzkopf going here, and I want to integrate it into this log flume. Not quite sure how to initially, but what I do want to do is cross over top of our drop here. So what I'm going to do is start with that and do this sort of large curve here. So this is at the bottom of some kind of a drop, whether it's the first one or whether it's a later one, to be determined. But at this point, that's kind of what I know that I want from an interaction standpoint. So we'll start there and work backwards. I thought this nice kind of swoopy right-left corner would work again. And I'm still trying to decide at this point whether that is indeed the top of the lift hill or if there's more to it. And at this point I do kind of figure, okay, maybe that is the top of it. And we can go ahead and start testing it. That station is purely a placeholder just to get the ride going so we can see what the speed looks like. Because that is the one challenge when you start from building in the center, is you kind of have to be able to judge what your speed is and kind of have some general knowledge of how the rides in this game run and how each of the trains kind of perform. So you know kind of more or less where you're going to end up before you get there, but it's super, super helpful if you can actually get the thing running ahead of time so you can see exactly how it's going to run, so then you don't have to think twice about it and end up doing something that might not quite work out once you get it running. So what we're going to do here is try and do this sort of like figure 8 layout. I mentioned earlier about being compact. Certainly we could go all the way around the backside of this hill, but in this instance I wanted to keep it relatively close here into this kind of hillside over by the water. Also a little bit of stuff over the water, not too much. I don't really like to go way out over the water, but something like this where it's just sort of dipping its feet into it, I suppose, is a little bit easier. Trying to alternate the sort of left-right corners, make it seem kind of swoopy, introduce our diagonals in there, and some elevation change. Typically, you don't want to do a lot of like left-right, and still stay at the same level. You want to keep making sure that you're changing direction and being consistent with that, and you also want to make sure that you're changing height, just because that's going to make your ride look a little bit more dynamic, kind of overall across the whole thing. So what we can do here is excavate out just a little bit, and then this lets us build out our station and our brakes. We are still in the situation here where we're dealing with a kind of cost issue, but we're going to get there, and this ride is going to really help us get there. So what I did is went through and made a brake run here, and there we have a layout now that it's complete, but I'm not satisfied with this one for exactly the reasons that I talked about earlier with expanding too far into the rest. I wanted to make sure we had space for at least one more large coaster. So in this instance, I decided, okay, maybe we're going to rethink this. And sometimes it's fair to perfectly rethink a good layout, and you can make it change if you're not satisfied, and I always recommend thinking of things with a critical eye, so that's what we're going to do here. And part of this is turning around now, putting our station here, and using this what would have otherwise been fairly underutilized space in between the lift hill and the log flume. That's going to be our brake run, and now we got to get up to it. So there's a couple of different things we can do here. We can have our large climb into a small corner there. I didn't really like that, and you can do a small climb into something, but those end up being really, really kind of difficult on intensity, and especially in a situation here where we're kind of worried about intensity, that could be a bit of an issue. So here I am testing with another one before I do all the landscape modification, exactly what that elevation difference is going to look like if we do this kind of stacked helix here that has a couple of different sizes. We go from large to small, and I would recommend that definitely. If you're doing a helix piece, don't just do one kind of stacked 360 in exactly the same height or exactly the same size. You want to vary the sizes here a little bit, and your larger one should always be on the bottom because you're going faster at the bottom. So here we go, and there it is connected up. I don't quite love the final little climb up into that helix, or out of that helix and into the brake run, but in general it kind of has forced our hands just a little bit there. There's some clearance issues coming into the helix, so we're going to have to deal with that, and in general, that one is kind of a marginal issue for me, so when I say think about things with a critical eye, we did that and determined that it is okay. So now we've got our coaster, we just got to afford to connect it up, and that's kind of part of the issue initially, which is just getting a pathway up here, which requires a little bit of landscape modification to just get to that point. Again, all of this is going to be kind of rethunk, I suppose, and reworked, including this queue, which is going to be in kind of a terrible spot here initially, where we're going to go up and across and then over top of the station itself. In some instances this could work, but it looks kind of funky and silly, so we're going to do this just to get it open, just to get our costs coming along and get some of our income going. We're also going to explore every single color over the rainbow to figure out what this thing looks like. We're going to eventually settle on some blues here with the dark blue and the kind of tan supports, but we will end up changing this here a little bit later. Now we're going to go back to purple and then back to blue once again. So anyway, for me, this is just kind of a fun thing to do. I'm usually fairly conservative in terms of colors, but it's nice to pick something kind of bold on occasion. But we already had a dark purple coaster, and we already have that orange helicopter ride, so those are two colors that are already pretty in your face there with big tracked rides across our map, so we wanted to pick something that complements those fairly well. So now that we have that one in, we're actually making some money now, so we can try and start to do something else, and that's going to be a pedal monorail. So we're going to go through here and add in this ride. We've done this in a bunch of different scenarios here fairly recently, and I didn't used to build with these. I never really kind of found a use for them, I suppose, especially in sandbox parks and other things, just because they're not super common in real life. But as I've been playing more scenarios, I do feel like they are a really good way to get an extra tracked ride into the park, and I put a very high value, in my opinion, on tracked rides. So we're going to go ahead and do that right here. We'll connect it up in a little bit, but first what I'm trying to do here is kind of reroute some things, which is going to let us do some changes here, which is closing this coaster, moving that exit so we can put it onto that side, reworking this entrance underneath of the carousel there, and then that lets us make this ride slightly larger, fill in the space just a little bit, put our entrance and our exit in here, and then we can go ahead and connect in our queue. So this uses some of this interior space here. There's not a lot to it. It does look fairly large, but because of the clearances for our junior coaster and some of the other rides in here, it does fill up fairly quickly, so you can't do a ton in the space. But what we'll do here is kind of throw a queue in here and a pathway, and this is really just to kind of get this thing open. We are going to rethink this here in just a little bit. I also wanted to match the flower setup that the park has already started with, which is those tulips in the multicolors, and then those kind of purple and pink plants as well, just because I think they look fairly nice. So now we are getting there in terms of research for different things, and we have some other rides to work with here. So one of the things that I was looking at doing is an observation tower, because that's a good one for rain. It's also a good one just for having additional rides in your park, and it's good to have a tower ride because we're not really going to have other tower rides in this park because those are going to be too intense for this park. So what I'm doing here is a little bit of adjustment here overall. I'm kind of chopping off the top of this mountain because I wanted this thing to sit slightly lower, and now I can go ahead and shrink this whole thing down and kind of make this work out fairly okay there. So a little bit of a realistic kind of bugger here, I guess, where if you look at where the coaster goes into the station and where the tower is, the tower foundation would be right in the way of this coaster. So thinking realistically, this is maybe not the best of choices perhaps, but this is one of those instances where it's something that I feel like unless it's pointed out to you, you're not really going to notice. So there we are. Now, continuing our coaster building, we're going to look at the single rail suspended coaster, which is not a typical one that I love to build either, just because it is super, super limited, but we'll make the best out of it. So you can see a couple of early tests here to figure out, okay, can we wrap it around the tower? Can we wrap it around the Ferris wheel? And kind of what can we do with it? And this one actually took quite a while. Actually, this section I chopped out a fair amount of the footage. Not necessarily of the process, but just sort of the deliberation and the going back and forth and everything. Mostly because we're trying to work with the terrain here, and the problem is, it works really great in this direction where we drop off of the mountainside, but then trying to figure out where it goes from here and then coming back and getting back up the mountain becomes more of the challenge. So I'm looking at a whole bunch of different options here, including going all the way out and top and over top of the pedal monorail there, or going up and over top of the queue for the junior coaster, kind of wrapping around and everything. These rides don't have to be very long, and they probably shouldn't be very long because you're already going to be dealing with a lot of capacity issues. The real life rides of this type from Caripro just aren't terribly long to begin with either. So it doesn't need to be this kind of grand headliner attraction of any kind, but we do still need to have some kind of a layout. So typically what I do is sort of little drops with curves and everything. You don't see big drops and climbs on these sorts of things. So we're going to keep it relatively simple. So as you're trying to figure out kind of which way the ride is going to go, sometimes it requires just kind of building a little bit and setting things up. So here I just shoved this station underneath of the mountainside here. So now we sort of have a connection point from start to finish. And now we just got to figure out how this connects up. If we had helix pieces, that would be amazing because we could just kind of drop down into it with like a 270 spiral or something. But alas, we do not have those yet. Hopefully that will change at some point here. One kind of last-ditch effort to see if I could shove this thing around the observation tower, but we cannot in the end. So a little bit of a shame there. But as I'm spending more time thinking about this, it's just trying to see, okay, where does this thing fit and what can we do? And sometimes it's just a matter of sort of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, which is part of why I build in pause mode now for our coasters, just because it gives us some time and ability to stop and think and kind of consider what we can do with this, and it helps us make the best kind of a ride that we can make. So there's a couple of different things there. You can see we were almost done, and we were nearly there, and here we could very easily finish it up as well. But what I did in the end is deleted it and restarted it going the opposite direction. So this is one of those things too, especially when you're working with terrain, is something to think about. Is sometimes the easiest fix is just to swap the direction that it's going. So in that case, that's what we're going to do here, and we still have our same section there, just backwards, because we really weren't changing much elevation there. We were just kind of going alongside the hill. So now this lets us come across over here, go over top of that junior coaster, and have a little bit of a back and forth on this side, as well as now having opposing lifts for this coaster and the junior, and then we can excavate out just a little bit of the mountainside now, and we have ourselves a station. So I think this worked out fairly nicely in the end, and is a decent sized layout too for what we were going for, and actually works nicely in the end. Stuck with here yellow initially, and there we go. So now, after quite a lot of deliberation, I think that maybe took 45 minutes plus in our initial stream, so sometimes it takes some time, but that's okay. You just got to be willing to put that in and look at things with a critical eye, as we have said many, many a time. So now that that's done, we got to figure out how to connect this across, and this is about the right time that we can start thinking about how to connect another pathway around, because we've got this whole side of the park that really does need to kind of develop out a little bit. So what we're going to do here is bring our queue over on this side, and we kind of have that up and over by the the Schwarzkopf Coaster there. So now we can connect it across and connect over to this section there where our Virginia Reel has its entrance. I wanted to kind of nestle in this pathway into the hillside a little bit so it's not sticking up off of the whole thing, and do a little bit of an elevation change here too, just to keep it interesting. So as we said before with pathway design, you don't want long straight sections, you also don't want large flat sections, so you just want to do little subtle elevation changes and things of that nature, and it helps to keep it looking a little bit more varied through the whole thing. So now we're making enough money that we can go through here and actually excavate out our entrance tunnel here and make this look a little bit more fitting of a park entry. So what I wanted to do is have this little plaza here that you duck underneath of that helicopter ride and also the junior coaster, and then you pop out here at this little plaza, and we have the pedal monorail above, and then I wanted to have a car ride here in the middle. So we have a whole lot of different things. We're going to sacrifice a couple of folks to the void there, but we will send those families gift baskets and be on our way. So now what I can do here is connect this whole thing across and make it look good. So I tried to do a little bit of adjustment there, but unfortunately I can't because of the clearances for the helicopter. So we'll just do this for now, and we'll come back through here a little bit later and make some adjustments to clean that up a little bit. We're going to once again do some kind of multi-stage rework here to figure some things out, including sending some more guests off to the void as we go through here and make some adjustments to our pedal monorail, which lets us now go underneath of the carousel too. And I think this one works fairly nicely because now we've introduced a new element to the ride, which is kind of cool. We unfortunately do have to have our entrance and our exit for the junior coaster on the same side now, but this does allow us to do a little bit more here in terms of the space for the car ride, because we can take that cycle monorail and put our entrance and exit on the same side, put the queue on that side as well, and now we've eliminated everything that's here in the center of this space. So now we've got plenty of space in here to do ourselves a nice little car ride. So what I wanted to do here is start to go through and lower some land to make this fit. I also wanted to kind of go in and out like we had in, Crumbly Woods, I guess. I love that original car ride that's in that one where it kind of ducks in and out of that wood side wall space. Also have a little bit of a circle up here by the park entrance. I wanted our station to be up here close to the park entrance as well, so you can kind of have a ride to ride right when you get into the park. And that's going to be this car ride right here. Now it does fill up fairly quickly once we get going in terms of building the whole space in here, because of a little bit of adjustment from an elevation standpoint. One of the things I wanted to do was get the junior coaster up off the ground there where it ducked into the tunnel. So by lowering the land there, we have to bring our car ride down, which is not really a problem. It fits just fine. And now we can come back up. And it's just a little bit of weaving back and forth and making this whole thing fit, and that we can still get our queue and our entrance in there as well. So we continue to excavate out this little mountain on this side, and that was one of the kind of regrets that I suppose I had as we continued through this build. Is I said initially that I wanted to generally respect the landscape, and in this instance it wasn't done super well there, because we had this great kind of hillside that the junior coaster was basically following, and then we kind of just excavated it out. So right here, even just a little further to get rid of that tunnel. Thankfully, we're going to bring that back. That's going to be here in the next episode. So for now, we're going to continue to just clean this up a little bit and fix this up. At least I think it's the next episode. We'll see. Now I can go through and clear this out so we have ourselves a queue. The queue will fit in there very nicely, connect over to our pathway there, and we have our completed car ride, which I think looks pretty good in there and kind of feels kind of like a natural fit. By deleting that restroom and sticking that underneath the ground on the other side, now we have the ability to adjust some land here, smooth this thing out just a little bit, and we can start to get into a little bit of decoration and theming inside this area, which includes some of these trees. Always like the locust tree there. change the color of the monorail to black so it blends in a little bit nicer. And then we can start to do some fencing and some other things as well. Also change the color of our car ride to brown because I just don't really like the colored track on that. The colored wood just never looks so good to me in my opinion. We'll go with the vintage cars because it feels like kind of a slower, older feel to this park perhaps. But now we can go through and look at all the trees that we have available, which is that conifer, this little quarter tile tree, and the locust, so we can continue to fill in the space with things that fit across the rest of the park. We don't want to do too heavy on the trees, but we don't have a lot of availability for fitting them in to begin with, so that's okay. Gives us some things to work with there, and we can fill in kind of the larger spaces and then fill in the rest of it with the smaller bushes and other quarter tile elements too. Just because you can fit a quarter tile tree somewhere doesn't mean that you should, so I tend to still like to cluster those all together and kind of make them fit very nicely. Come back through here with our hedge fencing, since that's sort of a theme throughout this whole map. And then we're going to mix in some other kind of fences there to make it look good as well. I also wanted to use some of these topiaries, so we're going to do the suits of cards here, the hearts and diamonds, clubs and spades, and that will fit in there quite nicely. And now we can put some restricted fencing through there so nobody climbs up into our car ride space. So that's it for today. Come on and join me next time where we'll finish up this park in part 2. Thank you all very much for watching. See you later. Bye now.